Hello, this is Alex Burkett, and you're listening to the Long Game Podcast. In this episode, I'm chatting with Mariya Delano. Mariya is the founder of Kalina Marketing, a marketing agency for B2B technical brands in SaaS, MarTech, data analytics, DevOps, and more. Beyond her client work, she's also a contributor to Search Engine Land and a content ambassador to Developer Marketing Alliance. Mariya is originally from Ukraine and is currently based in New York, USA. In this conversation, we dive deep on a topic that Mariya has recently written about, the changing nature of the internet and how tomorrow's internet is going to be much different than today's and that of 5-10 years ago. We talk specifically about platforms, Twitter, Threads, Mastodon, LinkedIn, and how they're evolving and changing and how AI is going to influence a lot of the content and the communities that we're engaging in. And we speak specifically to marketers and how they can look at content distribution and platform and personal brand building in the future. We cover much more on agency growth, entrepreneurship, tons of mental models here. Without further ado, here is my conversation with Mariya Delano. Well, my first question is that I saw that you were the president of an astronomy club. Is that true?
Nobody has asked me about this ever since I graduated college. Yes, it was true.
Strange. Well, what can you teach me about the stars?
Ooh, one of my favorite facts, I would say, about astronomy is one of the ways that we figure out like what we're looking at in space, because, telescopes, they just get images from space. It's just a bunch of photos, essentially, like really fancy photos. And the way you figure out if you're looking at a star, a planet, a black hole, a neutron star, a pulsar, what have you, is by analyzing the exact colors that are coming from that object. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how much physics you would have taken or how much you would remember.
I took an astronomy class in college. It was highly influential.
Like the light spectrum, the UV spectrum that goes from like a very long waves that's like radio on one side and then really, really, really fast waves where X-rays and stuff on the other side. And
like red is way closer and blue is way farther away.
Yeah, and then it expands past what we see into like radio, microwaves, TV stuff, and Bluetooth is there somewhere too. Then on the other end, you have X-rays and all of that stuff. So the way you figure out what you're looking at is we know that certain kinds of objects emit certain kinds of light. So we know that like if it's a black hole, there's no light there, but there's light around it that distorts in this way, and it's here on the spectrum. We know that if it's a planet, it might be here on the spectrum. And the more fun part is you have to figure out how far away it is, because the longer the light travels, the more the wave kind of expands and the frequency decreases. So you have to see, okay, this is here on the spectrum, but it's this far away. And you put it into an equation to figure out what the actual light wave actually is. And that's how you figure out what you're looking at, which is pretty fun.
That is super fun.
Just color. Yeah.
Do you know what a stella nova is or a nova stella?
No, I don't think I do.
I think in Latin it means new star, but it's I'm going to botch this definition, but essentially it was like when a dying star was in the gravitational pull of a new rising star, and it would essentially create this like supernova, and it would be like a new star or something like that. I remember this from my freshman year astronomy class, and I just remember that phrase. Yeah. And I actually named, so obviously I run a business called Omniscient Digital. Yeah. That's the agency. But I also have my own personal S Corp that I started years ago. Yeah. And I named the S Corp Nova Stella because I thought it sounded so cool.
It does sound cool.
So I've got a little astronomy influence in my business life as well.
I love that. I don't remember that term, but honestly, I'm so bad with remembering vocabulary for things that I probably have forgotten like half of it at this point. I might have heard of it. Yeah.
Nice. Well, let's go on to business related topics.
Yeah.
We're going to cover a bunch
business.
of stuff. We could do one of those things where it's like what marketers can learn about astronomy.
No.
Or like
top 5 things that marketers should learn about astronomy in 2023.
That was a big content trend for a while. It was like the newsjacking thing where it was like what marketers can learn from the Game of Thrones finale.
Oh God. Yeah, I saw that everywhere.
Well, I wanted to, so this wasn't on any of the podcast prep or the form that you'd submitted, but like just before we started recording, there was, you mentioned that you'd written an essay about like the future of the internet.
Yeah.
And that's a topic so interesting and so broad that I can't help but ask about it. So
yeah.
I don't even know how to frame the question, but like what is the essay that you wrote? What is your thesis on where the internet is going, and what drove you to write about this in the first place?
Okay. So the essay is called On the Birth of a New Internet. I think at this point it has 1,400 views or something like that. I published it about a week and a day ago. And the reason I wrote it was I had this weird weekend a few weeks ago where I got suspended from LinkedIn. For no actual reason, by the way. There was some bug where they flagged me. So my LinkedIn account was gone. And at the same time, Russia decided to have a coup. Mm-hmm. And I'm Ukrainian. So obviously I was following that stuff. And I'm, a native speaker of Russian and Ukrainian both. So I started posting on my Mastodon account because I was sitting there because I couldn't get on LinkedIn and I was bored. I started posting what I was seeing in the news in Russian and Ukrainian. And then people started following. And people started sharing and people started replying and liking. And suddenly I found myself like 3 hours later reporting to like hundreds of people live on Mastodon about this coup going on in Russia. And it was such a big moment because it was kind of the first time on Mastodon that people were able to keep up with current events live, like people used to on Twitter. It had never happened there before. People thought it wasn't possible. People thought there weren't enough users, that without an algorithm, people wouldn't be able to find the news, that there wouldn't be enough people just posting anything, or that it would be too slow to load between all the decentralized servers. But here I was kind of making social media history, right? Accidentally. And people were piling on more and more. So I ended up doing it the entire weekend. I stopped on Monday. Like I started Friday around 4 p.m. I stopped Monday morning. And at that point, I was at around 800 followers on Mastodon when this started. At the end, I was at nearly 2,000. And wow. I had collected like thousands of interactions from people. People were like tagging me in lists, being like, you need to follow her. Her reporting is so good, right? Everybody follow Mariya for Ukraine news. I'm like, what is happening? And then on Monday, I decided to, use that newfound following and ask if anybody could get me in touch with anyone at LinkedIn to get me back on, which again blew up. It was on trending, like gigantic journalists and stuff shared that. And somebody did, like multiple people ended up knowing somebody high up at LinkedIn. So they got me on. And so I was just thinking about that whole event because it was so strange, right? And at the same time, everyone was talking about Reddit dying. And then nearly a week later, Twitter decides to rate limit and hide posts if you're not logged in. So people start flocking to Mastodon en masse again. And Threads is about to launch. So of course I was thinking about the internet and I was thinking, where is it headed? Like I'm here witnessing multiple platforms change in front of my eyes and I'm kind of participating in some of it. And I'm noticing people's even narratives change because the narrative about Mastodon did change because of my reporting in large part. People said, yes, you can follow current news on here now. It is useful. You can do it like on Twitter. So I wrote about that. And my thesis sort of as to where the internet is headed is that Web 2.0, as the crypto people would say, unfortunately, I don't really like Web 3, but that's what they'd call it, of like the past 15 years with, social media sites that people went on and kind of the internet of 7 websites, most of which are screenshots of the other ones kind of thing. I think it's dead. I don't think it's coming back. I think we're watching it die. And I think if the big corporations are to survive, they have to adapt and change because I think the user preferences are changing. And this is showing us that it wasn't sustainable. I've been thinking about this as well in connection with BuzzFeed has been having a very bad time financially lately. They shut down BuzzFeed News, and there was this book from one of the people that I think founded BuzzFeed recently that was like, I don't remember what the name of it was. It's a recent book that just came out. And I read a few interviews with the author, and it was also talking about, the simple listicles and quizzes and that kind of like broad appeal, sensational articles. it was a mistake, is what people are saying. And I've seen this conversation in these PR spaces I'm in, these spaces with marketers and communicators all over the place, that a lot of what we've been doing is kind of all dying at the same time. And I think AI is accelerating that. Google's changing a lot of things, right? It started with the helpful content update, and they keep pushing more and more out. They're doing this perspectives thing now. I genuinely think the internet 2 years from now will not look like it has looked in the last 15 years. I don't fully know what it will look like. I think where it's headed is more fragmented and niche spaces. I think it might be more similar to what was maybe in the early 2000s, where we had a bunch of forum boards. You'd have all of these different sites for different purposes. If you wanted to keep up with a TV show, you'd go on one website. If you wanted to talk to your, cybersecurity colleagues, you'd go on another website. If you wanted to go learn about how to take care of your ADHD, you'd go somewhere else. It wasn't all one feed. It wasn't all like two social networks where you'd get everything. It was more fragmented. And I think that is where we're headed again.
That sounds like a good thing to me.
Yeah, I like it. I'm really happy about it, actually.
It seems like it's like too much pressure to have one or two platforms really owning the dialogue it's like they control the zeitgeist, like based on their algorithms, right? Like that doesn't feel like I remember the earlier days of the internet and like going on different, like I would type in websites like directly and go to these like little niche sites. I remember I went to a website just for snowboarding,
Yeah. I remember I was really obsessed with this forum that was just for The Sims 2. And it was just a whole forum, huge, really fancy. People were there every day. It was thousands of people, but only about The Sims. We didn't talk about anything else. And it was great. It was such a good time. And I also miss, like, there used to be these websites, or on most websites, you'd have a page with like recommendations, right? So people would curate other websites that people should go to. And that would be how you'd find new stuff instead of a social media algorithm promoting things to you. So
that was like the old days of blogging too. And you can see that a little bit in modern platforms like Substack, right? Like Substack, you can recommend other Substack users and their newsletters and platforms as well, which it seems really cool to me, as opposed to like an algorithm making those decisions for you.
You know what Substack reminds me of? It reminds me of LiveJournal. If you've ever been on it, it was a huge thing in like the Russian-Ukrainian internet. So I was on it all the time. And I do miss that. I miss those days of like, it was still a website where a lot of people were posting their own things and it was connected and there was functionality to jump between people's pages, but you still had your home on it, right? You could design some of it. It was still your main page and it was way more robust than a profile. So it was kind of a combination of the modern blog and the modern, social media site in a way. And Substack's one of the closest things we have. Tumblr used to be like this back in like 2014, Tumblr was cool, but not quite. Yeah.
So why did you, well, first off, can I ask a clarifying question that's going to sound incredibly novice? What is Mastodon?
Okay. Mastodon is a Twitter alternative that is open source and it is decentralized. So essentially it's like a Twitter-like app that is kind of not owned by anybody. Like there's one organization that's mostly making Mastodon, but you can take it and make your own product off of it because it's open source. And it's part of something called the Fediverse, which is basically a bunch of federated apps and social media networks that are all connected to each other using the same protocol. The protocol is called ActivityPub. I think it was set in like 2018 or 2017 as a standard. And it basically lets Mastodon talk to a bunch of other things. There's something called PixelFed, which is like a decentralized Instagram. There's another one called Kalki, which is like Twitter, but on steroids. And there's a bunch of apps and they all talk to each other and you can follow people from your app, from your account in all the other apps. And it's all in one thing and everybody communicates and nobody owns it. So if somebody decides to have a meltdown breakdown and, go on a rampage rate limiting people, you can just jump and you can take your followers with you.
Why did you choose initially to post on Mastodon instead of Twitter?
So I had two reasons. Well, the reason for leaving Twitter was I deleted my Twitter account the day Elon Musk bought it because I was seeing cybersecurity people saying that this is going to be dangerous given how many people he fired immediately. And I was really worried about getting my data compromised or hacked, and I just didn't want to deal with it. So I decided, you know what? I'm just going to take the plunge. I'm not going to deal with this. Bye. And the reason I went to Mastodon in particular was actually Rand Fishkin and Amanda Natividad. I was in like an office hours with them at SparkToro, and they were talking about how they were trying this out instead. and Amanda had an invite code, and I just clicked on it and signed up, and there you go. That was it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, Twitter definitely seems to have lost its luster. I'm still on the platform. I would never have called myself a power user at any point in time. I did have a time during the pandemic, I'm ashamed to say, where I was doom scrolling all the time. Just, with news that came out, I would just like find myself in these like hour-long sessions where I'm like, why am I reading all of these negative takes that I'm just like, it would leave depressed. And I'm like, I got to stop using Twitter. But I was never like it was never my platform of choice. But lately I'm noticing like the feed is all like super sensational, like
that's what I've heard.
So it's partly my fault, because like what happens is if you stop on it and dwell on it and click on it, like you're going to get fed more of that stuff. But half of my feed now is like fight videos, and because of course if I see it on my feed, I stop and look at it, like because it's hard not to. Of course. But I don't want all fight videos on my Twitter. So I'm like, all right, now I'm in this conundrum where if I go on Twitter, like I have all of this just violent stuff in my feed. So anyway,
have you tried setting up a filter? Because in Twitter's settings, you can filter certain words so you don't see posts with them.
I probably should do that. I try to mute accounts as well, especially if it's like clearly fake news or like just, people who are like doing the spammy stuff. But anyway, the point is Threads came out, and Threads is like very popular right now. I wonder how you reconcile that. Well, so obviously like Twitter's in maybe a decline, or at least like there's a backlash against Twitter, right? There's a lot of things going wrong with it. Threads took advantage of that moment and essentially made a Twitter copy with fewer features. The newer users, it feels much more positive at this standpoint. Who knows how that's going to transform, but it's still owned by Meta. It's still a major platform that is going to try to reach a critical mass. They're going to try to reach billions of users. So what is your, I always hate to ask prediction questions, but you had talked about the fracturing and the fragmentation of the internet and social media. How do you reconcile that with something like Threads? Do you think Threads has the potential to be big? Do you think what do you think is going to happen with this?
So I actually wrote on Threads as well. Just published an essay on that on Monday. So my take on Threads is, I think that one of the ways that it would stay and actually have staying power is if they follow up on one of the promises that they've been making, which they have been making repeatedly. So I think they're serious, which is actually to federate with ActivityPub, which is that protocol that Mastodon and everything else runs on. When you sign up, they have a little term there. One of the conditions is, I understand that this is going to federate and other people might see my posts outside of Threads. So I think that is fascinating, and that's what I'm focused on, because if something like Meta actually implements this big open source protocol that lets all of these indie owned and weird hacky like social media networks connect with the big Meta thing, I think that definitely plays into my prediction, because that is fragmented but connected, right? I don't say that if the internet is fragmented, nothing talks to anything else. I love APIs. Like, I think APIs are one of the best things the internet has ever come up with. I think they make the internet way better. And I would love for more websites to talk to each other and for more apps to talk to each other. So I hope the future of Threads is joining this big protocol, and hopefully more social platforms take that step too, and everything just kind of connects. On the other hand, I have problems with Threads because, Meta, I don't like Meta. It's a big evil company in many ways. They've done so many horrible things in the world, and they've caused so much harm. So I don't like that. It's also, another billionaire owner who might decide to do crazy things just like Musk. I don't think we've actually changed.
It's funny.
Anything.
Sorry to interrupt, but it's really funny. Like from a PR perspective, if you think back like 2, 3, 4 years ago, Mark Zuckerberg's PR was just in the gutter, and now it's like he's just like he's showered with praise, and
it's so weird. Mark Zuckerberg used to be one of my favorite memes that I would like use with my friends constantly. Like, we have in our Discord with a few of my friends, like multiple Mark Zuckerberg emojis that we use. It used to be like the photo for the whole like Discord group, just because
he was like a dork before. Like, he had that picture of him like caked with sunscreen, and like he was doing like the Sweet Baby Ray's the barbecue thing.
Oh yeah, the two smokers smoking some meats. And then my favorite was the Meta versus Zuck, Meta Zuck, the picture of him with in Horizon Worlds with the Eiffel Tower. I literally drew a poster off that photo for a concert and like made a pun with a song, right? Like we've been obsessed with that joke because it's just so funny. And it's so strange seeing suddenly everybody forgot that they were making fun of Zuck and he's like the guy now. It's like, what are we doing?
He started doing like jiu-jitsu and he started lifting weights. And then Elon Musk became a villain. I think Zuck just needed a villain, right? Like now, like everybody's attention is on Elon as like the bad guy. Now it's like, Zuck wasn't too bad.
But he was. That's the problem.
Right.
Yeah. And the other thing that bothers me quite a bit about Threads, actually, and this is what I focused my piece on, is the fact that they mostly ported social graphs from other networks. Mm-hmm. Right. So basically,
it's all basically an upload from Instagram, right?
It's all basically an upload from Instagram. And then if you were big on Twitter, a lot of your followers would come with you anyway, just because people would post their link on their Twitter and everybody kind of decided to jump ship together. So what you ended up doing, and also the algorithm promotes it, is within hours, there was a hierarchy already. You knew who the big accounts were, you knew who the medium accounts were, you knew who the nobodies were. And it was mostly exactly the same people who were big before. Mm-hmm. And that bothers me because I think one of the best things about a social network, especially a new one, is that kind of randomness and that chance to become a big account for anybody and to discover new people and to have new voices, build a culture on a new platform. And it's not there. It's not there at all. Right. I have been watching it every day and it's not changing because you already have accounts with million followers, with hundreds of thousands of followers. What are you going to do? The algorithm keeps promoting them and it's kind of set in stone. So unless they like really try to promote newer accounts in some other way, I feel like the culture of Threads is stale. It's the culture we had before. There's nothing new. And that's just, I feel like it's a missed opportunity. It's disappointing.
I think like I look at it as a marketer, like if it were up to me, if I wasn't running this agency, I probably wouldn't spend any time on social. Like I probably wouldn't spend any time on LinkedIn, but I'm looking at this, like, what's the opportunity from a marketing standpoint? And frankly, like I looked at it in the same way that you just described. I'm like, I don't know. It doesn't feel like I have any new advantage to getting on this early. It doesn't feel like I have an arbitrage opportunity. And in fact, like, I don't know, like, am I just going to post similar stuff to what I was doing on Twitter and get marginal results there? Like, it didn't feel like there was a huge opportunity just from a purely marketing standpoint. And maybe that's fine. Like, that's probably fine. Like that marketers aren't like flocking to the platform in the same way. But I don't know. How are you looking at this from a content distribution, from a marketing standpoint?
So I have been like looking at it that way too. And what I'm noticing is accounts who did have a following to port over, they're all bragging about how much better their engagement is, like relative to their follower count. But I also think part of that is just because Twitter has left people, a lot of people. I think that's because Twitter left a lot of people jaded at this point, right? The algorithm has been suppressing people more and more and more every month. So people don't even remember what their reach really used to be like a year ago. I think that's partially why it seems so good. And then the other part is it's like, if you've had an advantage, you're going to continue to have one. But if you don't have that big following, there's no opportunity. Like nobody really pays attention to you. The algorithm doesn't promote you that much. I don't see a marketing advantage to building a platform there. If you had a platform already, you're going to have one there probably still, but it's not anything new. You're not probably going to be exposed to many new people at all. It's going to be the same thing. Like there is no early advantage. I don't see a chance to build a following on there on its own. I genuinely don't, not as it is right now.
And it feels like to me, like the real red pill that I seem to have taken with these platforms is that if the company that owns it is a major tech platform, then they're not incentivized. They're incentivized in a different direction than you would want. So like the fact that people are getting more reach up front and early on is like, it's like the story of every platform.
Exactly.
That's how Facebook started. I don't know if you remember, like 6, 7, 8 years ago, everybody was complaining that their organic reach had dropped and you had to pay for ads to basically get reach on the content that you were previously getting tons of new followers on. And like LinkedIn, everybody's complaining now about their reach dropping, but that's the way it works. Like these platforms get people on because it's like, oh shit, like I can build a following very fast. And then eventually that diminishes and you start having to pay to play. And I just feel like that's the nature of these platforms because the incentives are, well, they have to monetize. Like they can't give free reach forever.
Exactly. Have you ever heard the term enshittification?
No.
So this is a term that started to become popular in media and on some social platforms. I've been seeing it more and more. It was started by this guy, Cory Doctorow. He's like a sci-fi author, but also a very, very, very prolific blogger. So he wrote, I think he started using this about a year ago to describe Facebook and Amazon. And he's been talking about it in terms of Twitter and such lately. And shittification is basically this idea that websites and social media companies, and honestly, most corporations go through these cycles of stage one. You're trying to get users on there to get network effects and to get popular and sort of take hold of the market, right? Capture as much market share as possible. So you're giving value to users that is better than anybody else gives them. You're kind of often operating at a loss, right? You're trying to promote their content, let people grow their following. Maybe they'll make a business offshoot off of your platform or something. Everything's for the user experience. Then once you've gotten a critical mass of users locked in and kind of addicted and have a platform and they're used to it, you start pandering to business customers. So that's stage two. So you start taking value a little bit away from the users and giving it to the business customers. Usually that's advertisers, but also certain business accounts and such, so that they start coming in, they start investing money and time into it. They start building, a following there. They become dependent on getting traffic, getting a following, getting an audience from this platform. And then once you've gotten both locked in, you move to stage three, which is enshittification. And you kind of claw back as much value as you possibly can from both the business and consumer users. And you get it for your shareholders. And you kind of try to get away with it as much and as long as you can.
Yeah,
so,
I'm not going to lie. The brand that came to mind when you said that was Airbnb. Immediately.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Because they actually had this framework when they started out called I think it was the 11. What does an 11-star experience look like?
Yes.
And if you've used Airbnb nowadays, you're like, this is nowhere near an 11-star experience. This is nowhere near what a regular hotel is.
No, I go to hotels now. Like I used to be such a fan of Airbnb, stayed in Airbnbs all over the world whenever we traveled. Now it's like, okay, where's the hotel? Because it's not good anymore. It's not. And yeah, it happens with almost everything. I honestly think one of the only platforms that hasn't gotten particularly enshittified is YouTube. And I think the only reason why is because it's owned by Google and it's not Google's only product. So they're
YouTube
not
got
trying
better over time, which is weird.
Yeah, YouTube's amazing, actually. YouTube's one of the only big corporate-owned tech platforms that doesn't completely suck.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, hey, I wanted to talk about content distribution too. That was another topic that you had mentioned before. Yeah. And I feel like this does factor into the platforms and the social media sites that we're talking about. Because on one hand, content distribution, like in my eyes, like you want to maximize the impact and the reach, which would sort of, it would get like a platform that has that reach and that impact. And that would be like, remember in 2007 when everybody was on MySpace, like then you could, like that would be the maximum reach you could reach. In a fragmented, in a fractured distribution ecosystem, what does content distribution look like?
So I've been realizing that I have a weird advantage if the internet really is headed this way, because I've always been a bit of a scrappy kind of underdog type marketer, right? I've never really marketed for a big company. Like I've never worked with a client that was firmly established and had a big presence. And for myself as well, it's always been small stuff, smaller clients, people who are trying to build a following for the most part, or they have a small following trying to expand it. And because of that, I've always been used to these kinds of weird underdoggy tactics of like trying to be really, really scrappy with organic. Which means I've often not relied on algorithms all that much for both my agency and myself and for, clients. It's always been, how do we market and get reach if the algorithms hate us because we're too small? And the set of just tactics, I guess, and ways of looking at it that I've developed is starting to become weirdly more and more advantageous because it's not relying on one platform, because it's often not relying on an algorithm. It's kind of trying to build a multi-channel flywheel almost. And one of the core tenets to it, I would say, is relationship building. So one of the ways I've grown my platforms, because the algorithms don't like me, like LinkedIn doesn't like me very much, is by getting people who have a big following to share my work. So that's been one of the main things that I've always spent a lot of time on, trying to make sure that people with a big following like me and like my work, and that I'm publishing something that might be similar to what they're talking about. So they would be incentivized to share it, because the second that one of those people shares it on their site, on their newsletter, on their webinar, even on their LinkedIn account, right, it bumps my reach everywhere. And usually people go to my LinkedIn or my client's LinkedIn, people might go to my Mastodon elsewhere. And that's how I've always grown things. So it's sort of like you're doing these things to get attention of people who already have an audience somewhere, and you're using them to kind of propel you forward, independent of what platform it's on, independent of what the algorithm might think of you. It's focused on the people first and foremost, and getting them to be your distribution engine. Does that
How
make
do you
sense?
get on the radar? Like, how do I get Dave Gerhardt to share my content?
So multiple ways of doing it. It's sort of a combination between like explicit engagement and content creation. So the most pure play here would be see where he's posting, see what he's doing, and start showing up. Show up in the comment section, try to show up early, try to say something that's actually interesting and would catch the attention of that person, like ask really good questions.
So I shouldn't automate that with AI?
No, because this is people, right? This is people who get so much attention, and you have to stand out. It's so much harder. So, do that. If he's doing a webinar, his own, or showing up on somebody else's, and there's a live chat, go and be in the chat. Make sure your name pops up over and over and you're memorable. Like, one of the things I often try to do is make sure that I'm posting something in the chat that the speaker is going to quote, like live. They're going to actually say, oh, Mariya left a comment. It says this, right? And keep showing up for a while. And at the same time, start noticing patterns. What do they talk about over and over? What's something new that they've started talking about? Is there something they've said that they've been struggling with? Often people who make content say and leave cues as to what they want to create but don't have time for or bandwidth for. And then you be the person that makes it. You be the person that makes it, quote them, name them, compliment them in your thing. So if they share your content, they're making themselves look good. And it's, fitting into their existing funnel and content plan. And it's not that hard, honestly.
Yeah. And how do you identify the people that are worth getting on the radars of? Like, how do you do, I guess this would be a form of audience research, right? Because ideally this person is reaching the people that you also want to reach, you also want to reach.
Yeah. So the way you do it is you start with figuring out who you want to reach and what they like and where do they go. Then you start finding patterns for where do they pay attention, and like who are there, specific people, specific publications, podcasts, newsletters, what have you. And then you sort of have to balance it out, right? Depending on your resources, depending on your budget, potentially, depending on the time you want to invest. You balance how much you want to go for reach and like potential to reach a really big audience versus something that might be easier, right? Because if you're trying to reach somebody who has millions of followers, they're going to be much harder to reach than somebody who has 10,000. I prefer to start smaller and kind of make my way up, but also sometimes I've accidentally reached people who were relatively big and it was a big jump. But you have to know that it's a trade-off. The bigger they are, the longer this will take, and the more effort you'll have to put in, and the more your content that you're giving them or your comments have to be exceptional.
As a heuristic too, I assume that the smaller audiences tend to be more targeted. I've just learned that like as audiences expand, it tends to get there's a lot more beginners in the audience, and that you may be after beginners. So maybe that is your audience, but like I've found that actually niches tend to be, it's like the riches and the niches.
Oh, yes. I've been arguing with a client about this for the past 2 weeks, actually, because initially they agreed with us that, going for the niche audiences and trying to target these very, very, very specific small places was a good idea. And then I think their CEO got frustrated or nervous, and suddenly they come back being like, none of these platforms are that big. Our total available market is 20 million people. Why are we not going to reach 20 million people or anywhere close to that with any of these sources? You're saying that the total following on your like 5 suggested distribution sources is only 10,000, not 10,000. I think it was 100,000 people. Where's the rest? Where's the 19 million? And like, okay, calm down. Like, you wanted a quick win. You wanted something that's more predictable, something that's more likely to work. You can't go for the big leagues if you want something that's more likely to work, right? It's more risky in every way.
Another framework that you'd mentioned that I think factors into, I guess, the content creation aspect of all of this. So once you identify that person or that audience, once you get on the radar, like the content creation aspect is also a piece in this puzzle. You mentioned the so what framework, and this specifically applies to thought leadership. So can you explain that?
Yeah. So I'm actually going to have a piece coming out on this sometime in the next 2 weeks in Search Engine Land. That's the topic of the piece. So if that does come out before the podcast, we might be able to link to it, hopefully.
Mhm.
Otherwise, though, So what is a framework that I took from academia and from teaching academic writing? I used to work as a writing tutor, writing instructor in my college's writing center for 3 years, which meant that students would come in, sometimes PhDs would come in, even professors with whatever they were writing. And I had an hour to figure out what the heck are they talking about and then how to make it better. And one of the rules we had in that writing center was we could never tell people what to do. So we were never allowed to say, you should write about this, or you should change the argument. We were supposed to ask them leading questions to get them there. And one of the key questions that we would always ask was, so what? Somebody makes a claim like the internet seems to be trending towards fragmenting into a bunch of niche websites. And the next thing you should do is ask, so what? Why should anybody care? Like, why is this interesting? Why is this important? Why is this worth saying and worth listening to? And that ties in very directly with audience research, right? Whether you're trying to target a big creator or whether you're trying to target a group or their audience or you have your own, why would they care? Why do they care about this claim? How does it affect their life? How does it affect what they're working on? How does it affect what they are thinking about and emotionally invested in? And you have to kind of take it further. I like to imagine the most dickish, skeptical reader possible, usually, whenever I'm planning content for myself or clients. Like, let's imagine this grumpy person who thinks that you're full of crap. They don't want to pay attention. They're busy. They want to put their phone away and click away, but for some reason they're reading it and they just want to hate on you. How do you get them to listen to you, right? Why should they? And I always try to write with them in mind and edit with them in mind. Like, what would catch their attention? If I were arguing with somebody in real life and I made a claim and they said, well, I don't care about that, what would I tell them? How would I convince them? Yeah.
I had the good fortune of working for Mariya from CXL earlier in my career, and I still have his editorial voice in my head. Yeah, he's a no bullshit guy.
Yeah.
And it's funny, I developed a similar framework. Mine was, this was more around editing a piece of content, but it was so what and prove it. So both of those things.
Yes.
And prove it was more important in maybe the CXL context where everything had to be very research backed. Like the thing was, don't just say an opinion. Like you have to back that up in like either your experience, a study, or something that actually proves that that is true. So instead of just making a claim, like it's important to do email marketing. It's like, who says? Why? Like, do you have any data to back that up? Yeah. And then the so what came next. It's like, well, what are you doing with that information? Like like, why are we saying this?
Yeah. And I find that, I don't know why it is, but lately it seems like most marketers are better at proving than actually answering why it matters. Like, everybody decided to quote statistics in their blog posts these days. People do tend to cite sources and get interviews and quotes. So I think that's less of a problem for the field. But often you read something and it reads at best like a Wikipedia article, and at worst, like somebody took a bunch of facts and threw them in, in a big laundry machine, spun it around, took it out in whatever order it popped up in, and is like, done, here's my article. It's like, okay, there's no narrative. There's no guidance here. I don't know what's important.
Nothing in this is useful at all.
No. And it could be, these facts could be phenomenally useful and relevant, but I don't know that because it's not telling me that. I think of the so what as a way to think of guiding the reader or listener or viewer through your piece, right? And through your argument and why it matters. You're sort of, you're walking around like a museum or something. You're like, this piece or this fact is important because, and then you give them the evidence and the context. Then, you walk through and you're like, okay, pay attention to this. Or if you remember only one thing from this exhibit, this is the piece you should remember. And this is why, right? You're giving them a way to hang on to what you told them. And especially in B2B, we always think we're educating people. That's not always true, but that's a separate conversation. But if we are, one of the best ways to get somebody to remember something is by helping them prioritize, by helping them hook it into their brain, by connecting it to something else they know or care about. Otherwise, they're going to read it. And even if you've had the most insightful study ever done in B2B in 200 years, they might not even notice that. Or if they do, they might forget. And then all of your work has been wasted.
Totally. I wanted to shift the angle real quick, more towards you and your mental models and productivity and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So I have a question. You grew up in Ukraine.
The first 12 years, I grew up in Ukraine. Then my family moved to Manila in the Philippines. And then when I graduated high school, I moved to the UAE. And then I moved to the US.
12 years is most likely sufficient.
Yeah.
And I'm asking this question because I had visited Ukraine in 2019, I believe. It might have been 2018. I spoke at a conference, met a bunch of people, and met a lot of the entrepreneurial community. And something that resonated with me was that the Ukrainian entrepreneurial spirit was very interesting. I felt like it was very sophisticated and scrappy and like very, very, very sharp. Like people were doing things in very smart ways. Yeah, I guess I'm like kind of leading the question here. So like ignore what I just said. The question is how have your Ukrainian roots influenced how you approach building a business, if they have?
So the most obvious way is the name of my company. My company is called Kalina Marketing, and Kalina is one of our national symbols in Ukraine. It's a shrub with these red berries, and it's one of the biggest kind of symbols that has been used now a lot in the war, but it was also very popular before. Like I've always liked it. We've had music about it, artworks, poetry, anything you can name. And I also purposefully spelled it with the Ukrainian spelling rather than the Russian spelling. So people notice. I have people reaching out, especially anybody that's Ukrainian or connected to Ukraine, be like, are you Ukrainian? I saw your company name. So that is just kind of in the DNA of the company to begin with.
What does it symbolize?
It symbolizes a lot. I mean, it's the berries themselves are used in natural medicine quite a bit. So there's a lot of associations with like health and curing and well-being. And now it's also a symbol of just strength as well and beauty, natural beauty of the country and of the people. Yeah.
That's cool.
So I love that symbol. That's also our color scheme. There's an illustration at the top of the website now of the berries. It's kind of everywhere. And I think even that alone sort of led me from the beginning to think about values in building the business. I don't take on clients that I don't believe in their product or service. If I don't think they're making anything of value, we're probably not going to take that project. And that's always been the case. And we've always been ready to say no. And I think that has helped a lot, and it's just embedded itself into the DNA of the company in so many ways. Like everything I ever make, any content that I publish, is often driven by something I really care about, because the stakes always feel higher, right? It's hard not to get influenced by the fact that somebody's trying to destroy my country right now, right? They're trying to erase my people and my country from existence. And I grew up with stories of other repressions, right? I've had family killed in the Russian Revolution in 1917, right? And I've had family members sent to camps and all of that, right? Because I grew up there, it's just there's this history of trauma everywhere. And because of that, I always feel like enjoying something and having it be fun is not enough. It should also matter in one way or another. Like I've always had a very strong moral compass, and I've always just had a very strong sense of like, if I were to die tomorrow for one reason or another, would I be happy with what I was doing? And I think that does get into this whole question of so what, right? It's the so what of the company. It's the so what of every project we take on. And it's also easier to think of every single piece of content as, how does this help somebody? Why does it matter, right? Because it should matter. It's one of my fundamental beliefs that all of our work should matter. I don't think it should be busy work or just to fill somebody's time.
That's a powerful answer. And from a purely utility perspective, a utilitarian perspective, it helps to have that meaning or that underlying purpose, because I'm sure maybe your business is run differently, but I'm sure you know that not every day is like, oh, like I'm bursting with joy and fun. And like you have days that are like, you feel a little gray, you feel a little blah, like you have down days, like, and it really helps to have some anchor or North Star that you can kind of point to and say, like, this is why I'm doing this every day. Yeah. Like, this is the reason I'm getting out of bed.
Yeah, and it is. And it's helped a lot, because obviously it's not been easy, like living with a war in the background, right? So many of my family members are refugees now, right? It's just always in the background. And it's honestly been lovely to have a business and to do marketing and to kind of have this total distraction from things in a way. Because one of the things I realized when the war started was being able to do normal work, right? And to just think about silly things like metrics or conversion rates or building a following or lead generation or whatever. It's a privilege. It's a huge privilege and it's a blessing. Being able to focus on things like that is a huge, huge advantage and something to be grateful for. Something that happened early on was a lot of people who stayed in Ukraine didn't want to leave their jobs. And there were a lot of like tech remote workers, and most of them are still working. And they would continue working in basements with like, bombs raining on them. And I remember Americans and such were confused by why. And it made so much sense to me because of course you do. That's what makes you feel human. That's what makes you feel like you still have a larger life, that you're not just reacting to this horrible thing that is being done to you, to this violence of the world around you. You're finding a way to create joy, to work on something, to improve yourself, to get new skills, to do something for others, to be part of something bigger. Even if it is a small company, it's still a bigger thing than just you. And it brings you this additional sense of being human beyond just safety and food and trying to stay alive. And that's so important when things get bad.
That is a great answer. I feel like we gotta end on that one.
Yeah, I don't know if I can follow up with anything.
I was going to ask you about like what content tactics are working today, but where can people find you online? Like what do you want to point people to? You had a couple newsletters that we'll definitely put in the show notes.
So the best places to find me online would be my LinkedIn, my Mastodon, and my newsletter. I have been trying to get more people over to the newsletter, and I've been trying to take it a little more seriously. So I'd say that would be the number one if people only check one out. It's
awesome.
called Attention Deficit Marketing Disorder, or ADMD, and the URL is admdnewsletter.com.
I love that.
Yeah.
Why did you name it that?
Because I have ADHD and I knew that I was not going to be able to have a consistent posting schedule. I'm just not capable of doing that. So I sort of made that into the initial branding of like, hi, join me, who is a professional attention getter but can't pay attention. Just ask my psychiatrist. And I'm not going to have a consistent posting schedule because calendars scare me. And I'm just going to write about whatever comes to mind. Most of the time it will be about marketing, but sometimes I'll probably get distracted. Right. And that gave me a lot of creative freedom to write about very weird things and then connect them to marketing. And that's kind of become the brand of that newsletter and why people go there.
I dig it. Lean in. It's way more interesting that way.
Exactly. It was like an easy way to stand out instead of trying to seem like an expert who can never do anything wrong. I just kind of swung out of the gates with, yeah, I have this medical condition. I kind of suck at paying attention. I can't do a consistent publication schedule, but, do with that what you will. And it's worked. It's worked really well.
People want that nowadays. And they're going to want it even more when the world is inhabited by robotic content, literally.
Exactly. So. Being human and being flawed is like the best advantage against AI.
I agree. All right. Well, thank you so much. This conversation was awesome.
Thank you.